For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon DeRayhove. Dr. Glenda Daniels joins me to discuss the Wits Journalism Pilot State of the Newsroom 2013 report. The State of the Newsroom report discusses the massive changes and challenges that journalists face today, both within the industry and externally pressing upon the industry. What were the most surprising findings in this report?
Well, actually, Shannon, there were quite a few. For instance, I thought that newsrooms would be more black. In fact, it's about 61% black. I thought there'd be more black editors. There are quite a few. They're in the majority, but not by a huge majority. I thought there'd be more women editors, but it's quite low. It's only 31%. So those were a couple of, big surprises for me on the race and gender issue.
What does the report say regarding transformation in newsrooms? How should this be improved?
Well, it says that these are the facts about transformation vis-a-vis race and gender. We didn't deal with age. It doesn't give recommendations, but it's implicit in that in fact we need to do more regarding mentoring, for instance. It came up over and over again in the chapter on training that a lot of journalists, young journalists, mid-career journalists want more mentoring from older senior journalists, but senior journalists are so overworked that they're unable to provide this function.
What are some of the most challenging issues that newsrooms in South Africa face at the moment, and how can they be overcome?
Some of the most challenging issues in the print media is related to declining circulations, which means newspapers are making less money, which means they tend to squeeze their budgets with the newsroom, which means they're not hiring really very experienced journalists. They're going to have 21-year-olds come in and do news. That's a huge challenge. The other challenge is meeting the challenge of digital first and the incorporation of social media. It's very difficult for journalists to be writing a story and having to tweet it and having to do online journalism and having to do multimedia. So it's so much more pressurized than it used to be 10 years ago. That's one of the pressures. The other pressure is the advertising has declined, which is also putting a squeeze on news companies. Then, of course, it's not the same everywhere, because in broadcast media, they're not always hiring journalists, they're also hiring models. So that becomes an added challenge for everybody.
Declining circulations in print media is a significant challenge facing newspapers. However, digital publications play a significant role in maintaining readership. How are South African newsrooms adapting to the digital age?
Well, they're doing what they can. They're doing it in a sometimes chaotic way, sometimes haphazard way. Sometimes they say this is now the converged newsroom, and you find an online journalist suddenly having to do a print story and getting confused about reporting structures. So there's a lot of confusion. It's sort of in transit. It's a transitory thing. It's going somewhere. We don't know where yet. But most newsrooms are actually in a state of experimentation, disruption, and they understand that that's where they're at, seeing what works best. And the other problem, of course, is business models. Nobody knows what the perfect business model is to make money online, for online journalism. It's a huge challenge. And none of them will say how much they're making or how much they're losing. That's because they're actually losing more than they're making.
What will the Protection of State Information Bill mean for journalists if the legislation is enacted?
If the legislation is enacted as it stands, and in fact you might have heard the latest news, which is it's now been given 2 days for review, which is absolutely ridiculous. In my view, they should scrap the whole thing and start from scratch, because it's a flawed piece of legislation. If it's enacted as it is, it takes us directly back to the dark old days of apartheid. In fact, it's even worse, because now they've stipulated 25 years for espionage. And espionage could mean anything. It could mean disclosure of information that we didn't know was classified information. So this is how it works. If you suddenly find a document that lands before you, and you say, whoops, this is a good story, as you should do, because you're a journalist, you want to publish. What the government or that piece of legislation is expecting you to do is to go to the police station and say, might this be a classified piece of information? That's ridiculous. It's completely outrageous, it's outlandish, and it's anti the Constitution that we have. Because the Constitution provides for the free flow of information in the Promotion of Access to Information Act, and this takes away that. So 25 years for espionage could mean what journalists would fall under if they disclose information, if they violate certain laws within the National Key Points Act and report on Kanla, etc.
The report provides an interesting analysis of the press ombudsman. Can you provide an overview of these findings, particularly focusing on how many cases were found to be in favour of the media?
There were few cases in favour of the media. I think it was 17 out of 48 that were dismissed as frivolous or not worthy of complaint. What was interesting about that chapter, in fact, it was a big surprise for me to analyse that chapter in comparison to broadcast. The number crunching there shows something quite interesting, that in 18 years of democracy there have been 18,000 complaints. Here in print we're getting about 300 a year. That's quite a huge difference with broadcast. So in fact, out of 18,000 complaints you might have 1,000 hearings, and with print you're getting about 100 hearings. So in fact there are more. The surprise is that you're constantly hearing about how dissatisfied the ANC is with the media, and the public have all these criticisms with the press, with the print media, and so forth. And yet, in fact, underneath the radar, there's the broadcast media having lots more complaints.
That was Dr. Glenda Daniels from Wits Journalism discussing this year's State of the Newsroom 2013 report.